Hey gang, and welcome back. This is actually not a reminder, but rather an announcement. Flipside Gaming is now selling some exclusive Richard Kane Ferguson playmats, which you'll see in this video. There's Dakin Blackblade, Solkanar the Swamp King, Pillage, and Nebuchadnezzar. They're free shipping within the US, and you can use the promo code to help get 10% off. In today's game, I'm playing Jason's Yargle deck, and I keep a hand with Swamp, Inventor's Fair, Strata Scythe, Necropotence, Polluted Delta, Swiftfoot Boots, and Reanimate. Eric is playing his Jodah deck and keeps a hand with Breeding Pool, Tropical Island, Chrome Mox, Exploration, Demonic Tutor, and Reforge the Soul. Kevin is playing his Gonti deck and keeps a hand with Swamp, Mystifying Maze, Jet Medallion, Reanimate, Dark Ritual, Ingrux Wake, and Viscera Seer. Chris is taking his Etali deck out for a spin and keeps a hand with Goblin Replica, Relentless Assault, Solemn Simulacrum, Two Mountains, Pyretic Ritual, and Seething Song. I win the die roll, and I start us off. I play a Polluted Delta, cracking it and taking 1 to find a swamp. Eric plays a Tropical Island and casts Exploration. He then plays a Breeding Pool tapped and passes. Chris plays a Mountain and passes. Kevin plays a Swamp and casts Viscera Seer. I play a Swamp and I cast Trespasser's Curse on Kevin. Eric plays a Godless Shrine, taking 2. He then plays a Chrome Mox, imprinting the Reforge the Soul. He then pays 4 to cast Jace Architect of Thought, and uses the Mini-Factor Fiction, targeting me. Eric takes the pile with Badlands, and he plays it as a second land for turn, before casting Vampiric Tutor and passing to Chris. Chris plays a Mountain and passes. Kevin plays a Mystifying Maze, and has his Viscera Seer punch Chase for 1. He then casts a Jet Medallion and passes turn. I play an Inventor's Fair and cast Swiftfoot Boots before passing to Eric. Eric then casts Wheel of Fortune in his first main phase, and we all discard and draw 7. Eric then drops an Arid Mesa and a Misty Rainforest as his lands for turn and uptakes Jace, targeting Kevin. He then passes to Chris. Chris plays a Mountain and casts a Worn Power Stone. Eric cracks his fetches at the end of turn to save some time. Kevin plays a Swamp and casts Gonti, targeting Eric. Eric is still looking for his lands at this point and grabs a Stomping Ground and a Sacred Foundry. Kevin then exiles a card from the top 4 and passes to me. I play a Swamp and I cast Blackblade Reforged. Eric also plays a Swamp and plays a tapped Watery Grave. He downtakes Jace, forcing me to make 2 piles again. Eric then takes the pile with Oath of Nissa and he casts it. He reveals an Avacyn, which isn't a good sign. He puts the Angel into his hand and then brings out his commander, Jodah. Chris plays a Snow-Covered Mountain and then casts the Immortal Sun. Kevin plays a Swamp for turn and casts Puppeteer Clique. He takes pretty much the only creature in any graveyard, Chris's Solemn Simulacrum, and grabs a basic Swamp. Moving to combat, he swings Gonti and Solemn at Eric. In his second main phase, Kevin then sacrifices the Solemn to his Viscera Seer, scrying and then drawing. He bottoms the top card and draws. For my turn, I play a Bloodstained Mire and cast Nevernull's Disc before passing to Eric. Eric doesn't even pause after drawing the card for turn, and he pays 1 of each color to use Jodah to cast Avacyn. He then taps out to cast Ravages of War, which no one is able to deal with, so we scoop it up. For game number 2, Jameson is playing his Narset deck and keeps a hand with Cascade Bluffs, a Mountain, Mana Vault, Disallow, Render Silent, Relentless Assault, and Beacon of Tomorrows. Fred 2 is playing Ghalta and keeps a hand with 3 Forests, Hour of Promise, Mana Plasm, Scavenging Ooze, and Ronus' Monument. Tim is playing my Zedruu deck and keeps a hand with Tundra, Polluted Delta, Phyrexian Unlife, Clever Impersonator, Rainbow Veil, Gyreach Sanitarium, and Opalescence. And I am playing Kevin's Kumena deck, and I keep a hand with 2 Forests, an Island, Reality Shift, Cultivate, Deep Channel Mentor, and Aquatex Will. Tim wins the die roll and starts us off. Tim plays a Tundra, and then remembers you get to draw for being first in EDH. I play a Scalding Tarn, and I pass my turn. Jameson plays a Cascade Bluffs, and casts Mana Vault. Fred plays a Forest, and passes. Tim plays a Polluted Delta, passing to me. I play a Forest, and I pass. On Jameson's upkeep, I crack the Tarn to find a Breeding Pool and have it come into play tapped. Tim also cracks his Fetch, while Jameson plays a Mountain and passes to Fred. Fred plays a Forest and casts Sylvan Library. Tim plays a Gyreach Sanitarium and then casts Phyrexian Unlife. I play an Island for my turn and cast Cultivate, finding a Forest to the field and a Forest to my hand. I realize I have no life total, and Jameson helps me out, albeit a little bit too quickly, and it makes me worried he's going to attack me. Jameson drops a Clifftop Retreat as his land for turn, and easily pays 6 to cast Narset on turn 3. Fred uses his library trigger and takes 4 to keep an extra card. He plays a forest and pays 3 to cast Manaplasm. Tim plays a Rainbow Veil as his land for turn and casts Humility, which is very welcome with Narset on the field. At the end of his turn, he gives the Veil to me. I play a forest for my turn and I pass. Jameson loses 1 on his upkeep and plays a mountain. He then swings Narset at me for 1 and passes. Fred uses his library trigger but doesn't keep any extra cards. He plays a forest and casts Ronus' Monument. Fred then casts Scavenging Ooze for only a green and puts the Monument Pump trigger on the Manaplasm. Fred then swings the Manaplasm at Tim for 3 and passes. Tim drops a Homeward Path for his turn and is a bit starved for colored mana. He passes to me. For my turn, in my main phase, I cast Spreading Sea on Tim's Tundra to further compound his mana issues. Tim unfortunately stops us with a Swan Song, and Jameson passes me a bird, and I pass to him. Jameson loses 1 on his upkeep to the Mana Vault trigger, and drops an island in his main phase. He then swings Narset at Tim for 1, and passes. Fred takes 4 to keep an extra card from his library trigger, and casts Nissa Vital Force in his main phase. He upticks Nissa to make a forest into a creature, which becomes a 1/1. Tim jokingly questions whether or not that land came to play this turn, and Fred is happy to make sure it isn't. He then swings it and the Manaplasm at Tim for 2. Tim still can't find a land to play, and instead drops a Mirage Mirror, but as one good counter begets another, I negate it. Tim in turn counters my counter with a Force of Will, taking 1 and exiling Dovescape. Jameson wants to get on this counter war as well, and casts Render Silent to stop the Force of Will. At the end of Tim's turn, I give Fred the Rainbow Veil. I play a forest for my turn, and I swing my bird at Tim for 1. I then pass to Jameson. Jameson casts an Enlightened Tutor in his main phase to find and put Scroll Rack on top of his library. He swings Narset at Tim for 1, and passes to Fred. Fred continues the trend of taking 4 to keep an extra card, and he upticks Nissa to animate a forest. He then plays another forest, and casts Beast Within on Humility. Fred then tries to cast Ghalta, but Jameson counters it with a counterspell. The Manaplasm still gets the trigger though, and becomes a 13/13. He swings the Manaplasm at Jameson, and the forest at Tim. At the end of his turn, Fred gives Tim back his Rainbow Veil. Tim plays a tap Tolaria West, and casts Zedruu. At the end of his turn, he gives the Veil back to me. I cast Kumena in my main phase, and then bring out a Tidal Warrior and a Deeproot Elite. I misread how the trigger on the Elite works, but Fred is nice enough to correct me. Jameson loses 1 in his upkeep, and casts Scroll Rack. He then pays to activate the rack, setting aside 4 and drawing 4, then putting the 4 he sets aside on top of his library. He then swings Narset at me, and flips the top 4. He flips Part the Water Veil, Beacon of Tomorrows, Relentless Assault, and Disallow. I block Narset with Kumena, and realize after the fact that I can draw a card with tapping 3 Merfolk. I do so, but only to be met with Disallow like a fool. Jameson then plays all of the spells that he can, and gets 2 extra turns, while Kumena kills Narset. Jameson then plays a Plains in his second main phase, and casts Open the Armory to find Lightning Greaves. On Jameson's first extra turn, he takes 1 from the Mana Vault and plays an Exotic Orchard. Jameson then casts Lightning Greaves, and Scroll Racks the only card in his hand to the top. I realize I should have given away the Rainbow Veil at this point, and not that it'll make much of a difference, but I give it to Fred. Jameson then goes to his final extra turn, and takes 1 from the vault. He then plays a Hollowed Fountain, taking 2 to have it come into play untapped, and recast Narset. He puts the Greaves on her, and swings her at me again. This time he flips Swarm Intelligence, Insidious Will, Time Stretch, and Need for Speed. I block with my bird token, not that it matters much. Jameson then casts the Swarm Intelligence first, and then casts Time Stretch, gaining 2 copies of the spell. He then casts Insidious Will, gaining an extra copy of it, and copies Time Stretch, which gives him like 8 extra turns? Fred, Tim, and myself at this point have seen enough, and we scoop it up to Jameson and move to the next game. Game review time. So it should be pretty obvious why each player won the game that they won, and I think it's pretty interesting that both of these commanders happen to have Jeskai colors in their converted mana cost. In both cases, both Eric and Jameson waited until their opponents were really unable to do anything and were able to resolve huge game-winning spells, basically by cheating them out. I think the main mistake in the second game was probably removing Humility while Narset was on the field. If he'd had to recast Narset, it would have slowed him down significantly, and I think Fred was a bit too impulsive removing Humility with Beast Within. He probably could have waited a little bit longer until people were lower in life, and then basically taken over with his massive board of creatures. The fault doesn't just lie on Fred though, and Tim and I blew a bunch of counterspells early on and a bunch of silly things. Everyone who sits down at a table knows that Narset likes to cheat spells out, and you still can counter them, so it would have been probably better suited if we kept them in our hands and waited for that to happen. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.